right, Crim 1, here we go with Chapter 11. It is an overview, why is that hard for me to say today? Overview of corrections. So usually at this point in the class, if we were all together, I would ask you to define the word corrections, and not necessarily in a context of the criminal justice system, but just in general. What does it mean to correct something? Obviously to fix it, to make it better, to bring it back to what it used to be. So that's what we're talking about with corrections. Of course, this is not going to move forward. There we go. All right, so what is corrections? Okay, this is the portion of the criminal justice system where the goal is usually to rehabilitate offenders or make them better. There are a lot of ways to do that, or to attempt to do that. And to start with, we'll break it down between institutional corrections and community corrections. This is much easier than it might look when you are looking at the words on your screen. Institutional corrections simply means that someone is in custody while they are under the supervision of corrections. So this is a person who is in jail, in prison, in juvenile hall, inside a correctional institution. So that is institutional corrections. Anyone who is under the supervision of, say, probation, parole, things like that, where they are living in the community and still under the supervision of the Department of Corrections or some sort of correctional supervision, that's called community corrections. So if I had to say that there was an area where I was an expert, I use that term loosely, but community corrections would probably be it. Having been a probation officer for 20 years, that's exactly what I did. So we have to go back to early times. Punishment in early days did not usually consist of a person being put into custody or locked up. That was not usually the case. People were held in custody usually until they could pay their fines or until their punishment could actually take place. So if they were going to be branded or beaten or have their arm cut off or drowned or whatever, people were generally only held in custody for short periods of time while they were either awaiting their fines being paid or their actual punishment being imposed. Hulks are old ships. So a lot of times back in the much longer ago, before the United States was a country, prisoners were sent to work in old ships. They were housed in dungeons. Then they moved on to workhouses. So this is a place where basically a prisoner was enslaved. Transportation is another type of, I guess we could call it corrections. Transportation is when a person is basically banished or exiled from their country. The country of Australia was basically a location for people in Britain or in England when they committed horrific crimes. They were banished from the country of England and sent off to Australia. So that's transportation when people are banished. Early American jails. I want you to get a picture in your mind of what an early American jail looked like. Probably as bad as you can imagine it is probably what it looked like. They were inhumane, they were filthy, they were places where men, women, and children were all housed together. There was disease, there was filth, there was abuse. Basically, they were horrific. So, moving on. The history of corrections in the U.S. The Pennsylvania system is where the term penitentiary began in the United States. And some of you may be Catholic. I am Catholic, so I'm allowed to talk about Catholics. So Catholics do this thing. After they go to confession, the priest will give them their penance. Your penance is when you go out into the church after you have confess all your sins, and you go out and you kneel and you pray quietly and think about what a bad person you are and how you can make things better and how you're not going to do stuff like that again. That's the concept of the Pennsylvania system. The Pennsylvania system was a place for solitary confinement where inmates were not allowed to speak to each other at all. They were not allowed to speak at all. As you can imagine, people being housed in solitary confinement without any kind of human interaction did result in many people going crazy. So that's obviously kind of a problem in that. So then the Auburn system was a little bit different in that inmates were allowed to leave their cells and go to work during the day, but they still were not allowed to speak. So the concept of a penitentiary was quiet reflection, and the goal was that people would realize how bad they are and change their ways. Probably wasn't all that successful because a bunch of people went crazy. The reform system, this is kind of more like a reform school type of concept. So these people were sent to a kind of a school type of program in order to be rehabilitated. Then in the early 1900s, many of our young men in the United States were drafted and sent off to war. So we needed people to do a lot of work, industry work. So at that time, that's when the industrial prisons started, when prisons were being, basically prisoners were being enslaved again inside the prison and forced to work, to perform manual labor. Therapeutic model, this is when we started to lean toward rehabilitation and basically treating criminals as if they were sick, physically sick. So they were basically, it's called the medical model, and they were basically treated as if they were ill while they were in prison. Today, your book says that we are still in the punishment model, which means punishing people for their crimes by keeping them locked up for long periods of time. Although I would argue that the pendulum has started to swing back toward rehabilitation. Probably 15 years ago, the Department of Corrections, California Department of Corrections, used to just be that, CDC. It is now CDCR, so the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. This pendulum tends to swing back and forth throughout, has swung, is swung a word? Back and forth throughout history, and so we are kind of back in that rehabilitation phase, which was really popular in the 1970s. All right, and then models today. These are basically the concepts or models or goals, I should say, or I guess that's the right word to use, of the correction system. Punishment is basically always has been one of the goals of corrections. It's also crime control, so making sure that people do not continue to commit crime. Rehabilitation, obviously, if you want to rehabilitate someone, it's kind of similar to the corrections type word, but you want to fix the problem. Why are they committing crimes? Figure it out and fix whatever that issue is. Reintegration is when a person is leaving a correctional facility and going back out into the community. And then you have restorative justice. And restorative justice is a concept where victims and offenders get together with a mediator. And instead of going to court, the victim, offender, and mediator work through the criminal behavior without court involvement. So let's say someone spray painted my house and graffitied, spray painted my house, and they got caught. And the police bring the suspect to me and say, we caught this guy and he's the one that spray painted, that vandalized your house. Do you want to participate in restorative justice where you and he can talk about the crime and figure out the best way to resolve it? And I can say yes or no. So me as the victim, I say, yeah, sure. So myself, the guy who spray painted my house, and a mediator will all sit down. I will tell the suspect how he made me feel he will tell me why he did what he did, and then I will tell him what I need to be made whole again, and that would be fix my house, whatever you spray painted, and maybe write a letter of apology, something like that. So restorative justice, it's really common. If the person complies, the suspect complies with the terms of the restorative justice, what they agree upon, then the case is dismissed and never goes to court. Prison populations. This is kind of shocking if you read this. 1 in 38 adults in the United States is under some form of correctional supervision. Not sure how many people are enrolled in this class, but it's probably more than 38. And so you can imagine at least one of us is under some form of correctional supervision. That could be in custody or out. Most of these offenders are not incarcerated, but are under the supervision in the community. So this is like probation, parole type of people. We, the U.S., incarcerate about half of the world's penal population. Growth of our prisons does seem to be slowing. There's a lot of reasons for that. Money is probably the number one reason. Number of jail inmates varies between states, and overcrowding has been a huge, huge issue, certainly in California. Here's just kind of a breakdown of ages of who's in custody. Here's a breakdown of ethnicity or origin. These are prisons only. Prisons only. Then we have, let me see, public safety realignment. Plata versus Brown. This is a Supreme Court case where an inmate in California prison system was basically sued, indicating that his rights were being violated with cruel and unusual punishment because of the fact that he was sick and had been unable to see a medical professional. The Supreme Court heard the case about 10 years later, but heard the case and agreed that it was cruel and unusual punishment, and that the state of California simply needed to make changes in their prisons immediately, or the federal government was going to take over the state prison system. In response to that, Governor Jerry Brown enacted AB 109, or Assembly Bill 109. This is our prison realignment. A lot of you have, oh no, this is the wrong class. This is not crim 20. This is crim 1. Prison realignment is when our California state prisons were at 140% of capacity, and we had to get that down to 100% by releasing inmates. So that was quite a challenge, and we are still feeling the effects of this. So ultimately, if you are not a serious violent felon in California, you are not going to prison. So that's basically what AB 109, one of the things it did. It also sent inmates back to their county of origin and let the county handle them as opposed to the state Department of Corrections. And private prisons, not super common, but these are private companies who will occasionally take over prisons, and the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, or whatever prison system, whatever state they're in, will pay those private prisons in order to house their inmates. That's it, I think.